Hello and welcome to On the Cube Leadership Podcast, where we take a look at what's happening across the news and take it from a leadership perspective to see how we can become better leaders. Did you know that leadership is more than just managing people and tasks? You know, people think that maybe leadership is about inspiring and motivating and getting tasks done, but a very, very large part of being a leader is being able to make sure you have the right team. That's right. Look, I know that some people think that, well, a good leader should be able to manage anyone and be able to help inspire and motivate anyone. That's not right. There's some people that just aren't right for the team, right? And it's not that they are a bad person. They just aren't right for that position in this team, and they might thrive and be better somewhere else. Now, yes, we do need to performance manage, and as leaders, I think sometimes we're a little bit quick to give up on people and just get rid of them and fire them and everything like that before actually trying to help someone succeed. However, as a leader, one of the biggest, most important parts of our role is to make sure we hire and fire properly. Make sure we're hiring the right team and making sure we're firing the wrong team, but at the right time. And there's some nuances to being able to hire and fire and know when and how to do that. And so there's a few things that's happened across the news cycle in the past few weeks that I thought, let's gather these stories together and discuss it and see how we can be better as leaders to know how we can better hire and fire. And to discuss it today with us, as always, is the business pastor, Dr. Rod St. Hill, businessmen's pastor and businesswomen's pastor as well. But the business pastor, Dr. Rod St. Hill, welcome once again.
How you going, Craig? And as always, it's really fantastic to be with you.
Hiring and firing. How much have you personally been involved in that in your career?
More hiring than firing, thankfully,
Yes.
But I have been involved in both, and I think there are good biblical ways of doing both of those. So no doubt we'll get to touch on some of those later today.
Of course. So let's get straight into our first topic, and let's talk about Barstool Sports. So I don't know whether you've heard, but Dave Portnoy, has recently bought back Barstool Sports for $1. Now, it's pretty impressive. He originally sold this going back probably about between 5 and 10 years ago. I think it was like now I'm mixed up with all my numbers and everything. But he sold it for about $500 million and then has recently bought it back for $1. Now, you're wondering, what's this got to do with hiring and firing? Well, it's really interesting that Dave Portnoy was built up Barstool Sports, which is pretty much just a media company, right? They do a bunch of other things as well, like some sports management things as well for college students. But he built up this media agency, sold it to Penn Entertainment, which is a gambling organization, and then recently Penn wanted to do a deal with ESPN, and there's no one's admitting it, but pretty much they assume that ESPN said, we don't want Barstool Sports to be a part of the deal, because Dave Portnoy says, when it comes to what they do, they don't want to filter on themselves, because they are a media agency, they're YouTubers, and so they like to be able to be free and to say and do whatever they want. And with a gambling company, there's a lot of regulations and everything like that. So there's a lot of challenges that they face, with them being involved, and ESPN didn't want that to go ahead with the deal. And so he bought the company back for $1. Now, you're probably thinking, what's that got to do with hiring and firing, which is what we're going to be talking about today? Well, he kind of was hired. He was, fired originally, and now he's rehired, I suppose, as the boss now. But the interesting thing, after this event, he went back into his offices, and we saw this on Twitter. And let me get my screen back up there. On the day after this announcement, he posted this on Twitter. Now, I'm not going to post the sound, but this is him showing a video of his offices. Okay, so I don't know why that's not playing, but you can see that his offices are empty. And he scans around, and a bunch of employees didn't turn up to work. So it's really interesting, and he goes through this whole thing of like, well, if they don't want their jobs and blah blah blah, like all this sort of stuff. But now, part of me does consider possibly, they're a media agency and they're all about their, playing jokes and stuff like that. So who knows whether this was part of them just trolling or whatever, or maybe that was an empty part of the office that's a traveling team and that team are away right now or something. Who knows, right? But let's take it on that consideration that, Dr. Rod, when you take over a company and the next day you turn up, and he said that this was kind of like it was posted at 9:54 a.m. So almost 10 o'clock. If you turn up after purchasing a company, now, okay, you buy it for $1. So maybe it's on the theory of you pay peanuts and get monkeys, right? So maybe it's that. But what's your take if you turn up the next day and half the office is empty and people didn't turn up?
Well, I think once I got over the insult that nobody turned up for me, I'd start wondering about the culture. What is going on here? What are we doing paying people for not being at work?
Yeah.
And I know that lots and lots of people got used to working from home, and I know that there are many jobs where it's actually possible to work from home most, maybe even all of the time. But to turn up to an office where you've got desks, you've got chairs, which are obviously designed to have people at them, and they're not there, I really do think I'd have to go first to culture and ask, so what is it about the culture of this place that leads people to think that on my first day, they don't need to turn up on time?
Yes, and actually you hit on a good point, because I'm not going to substantiate any of the claims because I don't know anything. We don't know the real stories, but I've heard rumors that he's not the easiest person to work for, and maybe this is people going, oh, if he bought the company again, I don't want to be a part of it or whatever, so it goes back to culture, and it shows that I think for this is the thing that I wanted to bring up was, you're spot on, the culture. If we're hiring and firing, we can hire and fire as many people as we want, but if the company has bad culture, the staff are never going to perform. Or they might, but they might for a season and then their performance will drop off, or there might just be negative, whatever the culture is that you're setting. So before hiring, this is one thing that I do with my clients, is I make sure that when we hire, before we hire, it's like, what are your core values? Because when you hire someone, you need to show those people what those core values are to make sure their values align with that, or that at least they can operate within those values. What's your take on then the culture and how would you play this out? Okay, you come up, what's the culture like? You've just bought this organization. Obviously, the culture may not be that good. Are we straight away doing, like Elon Musk that we spoke about a few months ago? Are we just going in and just clearing everyone out and just firing everyone? Or what should we do in this situation?
Look, I don't think so, because you can't be sure why it is that any individual is not there. First, I wouldn't have been insulting about the staff who weren't there, because you read his Twitter post. I suppose it's an X post now, but
yes,
it was quite insulting of employees. All right, so that I wouldn't have done that as a leader. The other thing is, I think I probably would have
Which
got a
goes
message.
back to your concept of culture, which I
Yeah,
think
absolutely.
that
It's all part of culture. It comes
there
from
was
the
a whole
top.
bunch of things that actually went down there that he was just ripping on people, and that does seem to be the culture. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah, well, that's not a good way to start. But I think I would have also tried to get out of communication before start of work to say, hey, look, this is what's happened.
Yeah.
I'll be in my office at 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. or whatever, and we'll get together. We're going to have a meeting at 9:15 or something like that. So give people a reason to be there. And look, I wouldn't use a social media account in any case to deal with an issue like this. I'd keep it in house if I could.
And I think that is actually the challenge with this social media culture we're in. Like this is, let's be honest, this is the world we're in now. Everything's online. Everything's being live streamed, everything's being tweeted or X'd or whatever they want to call it now, but everyone's like, whatever their thoughts are just being put out, unfiltered thoughts going out, and that's kind of like the environment that we live in. How do you still manage being able to manage your team but still live in this environment, which is obviously they're a media agency. They should be like, that's the whole point. That's what they should do. And they are that kind of frat boy kind of culture of mucking around and all that sort of stuff. So I suppose my question is they're a media agency. They should be putting everything online. That's kind of what they do. They're a sporting agency, which is kind of a frat boy thing. And we say that's bad culture, but it's kind of who they are and what they do. How do you draw the line between this is who we are and bad culture? Because we there has to be a space for people to, so to speak, boys to be boys and all that sort of stuff. And it's quite obvious this organization, that's what they gear themselves towards. Where does that culture cross the line into being bad culture then?
Oh, well, look, first you used the expression, this is how we are, and then moved on to talk about culture. Well, culture is who we are, right?
Yes.
So that if you want to know what the culture of a place is, find out what people think they are. Who do you think you are, so to speak? Now, the other thing I would say is this, and this is a general principle in business. We're in business because we're solving somebody's problem.
Yes.
Now, the problem that we might be solving as a media production company is people want to be entertained, people want to be informed, and some people like being informed in an entertaining way.
Yes.
And that's great. And that's what needs to be the focus. And I think one of the things that can sometimes happen in media is that we begin focusing on ourselves. We want to know how many people watched me, how many favourable comments about me were made. I think that's the wrong question, really, because the right question is, whose problem did we solve today? Or how many people's problems did we solve today? Because people will only keep watching, they'll only keep buying if you keep on solving their problem. Theologically, I put it this way, the purpose of business, any business, regardless of what kind of business it is, it must be positively contributing to human flourishing in some sense.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't, it's not going to succeed. So, and to succeed, I think you do have to have a culture within an organisation that says the people here actually matter. So I don't really see much value in insulting your people.
Yeah.
And I don't see much value in letting people discover what your own values and principles are rather than you being upfront about it.
Yeah. That's good.
So, for example, if there is a culture that says, look, we can work from home on Mondays and Fridays if we want,
yeah.
or whatever, that's okay. But let's address that directly rather than let your people find out by experience that,
Yes.
well, actually, this is not the culture that I want to develop here anymore. Communicate it in words rather than let people experience the change.
So how would you, before getting into the hiring and firing, because I mean, let's take this for what it is. It is a boss that's upset that people haven't turned up to work on the first day, pretty much, right? And so let's take all the other stuff out of it. There might be their culture. It might be it might just be the way they are. It might be media agency. They may just be blowing this up. This might just be for views. Let's take all that out of it. Let's imagine you did turn up and you go, okay, the culture here is not right. What's the process you take to make sure you shift that culture, and how long do you give people to kind of get in rhythm with the new culture?
Look, that can be quite difficult. They say culture comes from the top, and it does, but it's also something that doesn't really change overnight. And if a culture has developed, as has been the case in many organisations now since COVID, where people feel now that it is their right to work from home.
Yeah.
And look, I think there's an extent to which that is a good thing, and it can actually improve productivity. But I think this is about flexibility, not about rights.
Yeah.
It's about developing a kind of flexibility that works well for both the employer and the employee. I think the other thing we need to keep in mind as employees is that's what we are. The firm doesn't exist to do everything we want it to do. Or it doesn't exist to pander to our own preferences all the time. Where it is possible to do that in a way which is flexible, but which doesn't actually undermine the vision, the strategy, and the operational plans of the organisation, that's great. I'm all for flexibility. But at the end of the day, that flexibility shouldn't be compromising the mission of the organisation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that...
Just while you're thinking,
go.
Your fundamental approach to leadership is about being on purpose, right? Exactly the same applies to an organisation. The fundamental cultural value within an organisation has to be we're on purpose. Our purpose is defined by our mission. We are always focused on our mission.
Yeah, that's spot on. And I think that the lesson we can take from this situation is the fact that, look, before, if we're unhappy with our employees, if we walk into an office and it's empty and we're unhappy with our employees' situation, their performance or whatever, I don't think there's a place where we go straight into an instant berating, especially a public berating. We need to step back and go, what's the culture that I've set as the leader? Before you can fire someone, before you go through performance management, it's like, have I set the right culture? And am I making sure that the values of this organization are clear and understood? And then I can help my team work through their journey of aligning themselves with those values. And usually when you do that process, you'll find that people will self-deselect, right? You won't necessarily have to fire someone when you're so clear on your values and you're working them through them and they know that they can't or don't want to align with those values. They will self-deselect. And so sometimes that might save you with firing, because if you're just clear on your values and people know that they can't live up to them, they will check themselves out. So talking about an organization that people haven't self-deselected, they had to fire. And this is a story actually and I've had this story on my list since, when was the date of this? Since November last year. And then something came up in the last couple of weeks with, it's Stripe. Okay, I don't know why I'm holding off the punchline. It's Stripe, right? So we're looking at Stripe in November 2022. Stripe cuts 14% of its workforce. And when this happened, the way the CEO did this, I felt this was such an incredible leadership lesson, but it didn't fit with any of our stories and then with any of our themes, and then it kind of got a little bit late and everything like that. But then recently, Stripe have just laid off another 40 people going back in the last week or two, right? And what I want to do is, I think one of the tough things as a leader is to fire people. And I think in both of these instances, I think that what I believe is their approach has been really good. And I think that we can learn a lot from the way that they approach this firing, because it's never nice to actually fire someone, but sometimes you do have to make that tough decision as a boss. And I feel like, and now the Stripe CEO was actually praised, widely for the way that he approaches. Now, why? Because normally when CEOs of big tech companies that are making billions of dollars and stuff like that, when they start firing people, they get bad press, let's say. But let me actually read. What happened is when Stripe they announced these firings or the cuts. I don't know whether they laid them off or whether they fired them or made them redundant. I don't exactly know. However, he released this public notice, and actually all the links to everything that we refer to is all down in the description. So go and check that out. But one of the part of that note that he wrote was, "We overhired for the world we're in, and it pains us to be unable to deliver the experience that we hoped that those impacted would have at Stripe." So he said, "You know what? We overhired." Because what happened is, during the pandemic, Stripe obviously does online payments, and obviously e-commerce exploded during COVID. And so they did a massive hiring run, and so he said, "Look, we overhired. We overhired for the world that we're in, and we cop it." But what was really good is they actually took responsibility. And I think this is the key, right? That you don't normally see this with big organizations. When they fire people, they're like, "Oh, it's just the environment, the market has dropped." Like, they're pointing at other things. But the CEO here, even though he's already said, "We overhired for the world we're in," it's like, we overhired. It was our fault, right? But this is a direct quote from his note. "In making these changes, you might reasonably wonder whether Stripe's leadership made some errors of judgment. We'd go further than that. In our view, we made two very consequential mistakes, and we want to highlight them here since they're important." The fact that they're going, "Look, we made mistakes, and here we're gonna share what our mistakes were." Being open, authentic, and vulnerable, I think, is really important as a leader. "We were much too optimistic about the internet economy near-term growth in 2022 and 2023, and underestimated both the likelihood and impact of a broader slowdown. We grew operating costs too quickly, buoyed by the success we're seeing in some of our new product areas. We allowed coordination costs to grow and operational inefficiencies to seep in." They had to fire 14% of their workforce. But instead of blaming other people, they took responsibility. They said, you know what, this is our fault. And while I think it's actually not that, it's never nice to fire someone, even when they're not performing. It's even worse to fire someone when, well, they're performing, but the market, the business just isn't there. So we just got to let them go. We like them, they're doing a good job, everything, but we just don't have the work for them. But for them to be able to go, you know what, you're fired, right? You're let go, but it's our fault. I think it just takes the edge off the firing for the employee or now former employee. What's your take on that, Dr. Roy?
Look, I think the way it was handled was really excellent because it's not the employee's fault, so to speak, which that actually helps with the termination of their work. And I think more than likely what John Collison said was true. They did make a mistake. They thought the market was going to grow faster than it did, partly because the rate of growth of that market slowed down anyway. But then you've got the general malaise in the economy overall to contend with as well. So they got their forecast wrong, essentially. They were overly optimistic. I think it's good to say that. And let's face it, if you're going to receive the accolades and accept the accolades for the times when you get all your forecasts right, you should also be accepting responsibility when you get it wrong. I think the other thing too is it is important as an organisation to fire people when you have to.
Yeah, that's good.
And look, we find this really tough as Christians. And I've said this before on our podcast, and it is a little bit controversial. God is our provider, not the managing director, not the owner of a business. God is our provider. If a business has a mission, the focus has to be on the mission. And if hanging on to too many employees is going to compromise the mission, then you shouldn't compromise the mission. Now, I know that's a really difficult thing for Christians to receive, but I really do believe that, because if it's a God-given mission, if your business has accepted a God-given assignment to create some positive contribution to human flourishing, that's what you need to focus on. It's God's responsibility, in a sense, to look after the people. Now, this doesn't mean we should treat people as if they're cannon fodder. You know, we should undertake a good process for selecting people to make sure we're getting square pegs for square holes, so to speak. I would actually see that as an expression of neighbour love, because it's not a good thing to employ the wrong person because they're not going to be happy, and nor are you. But I think also when we're making people redundant, to the extent that the business can without undermining its mission, it needs to help people make the transition from being employed to being unemployed. Now, that may cost money. You may be in a position where you can support people financially beyond what is required by the law. In the United States, there's most employment contracts are what they call at will, which essentially means that you've got work today if the boss decides, and the boss has got you on his payroll or her payroll, if you decide. So there's not really much legal compulsion to financially help somebody out. But I actually think if you're a Christian in business, you need to consider very carefully to the extent to which you can help somebody make the transition. Some financial provision is part of it, but if you're able to let them come in and use the office if they want to make phone calls, to type resumes, etc., do everything you possibly can to help people make the transition to another position. There are consultancies that will help people with that transition. Employ the consultancy to help your people make the transition. Now, look, not everybody will want to do that because people deal with the tragedy of losing their job in different ways. The other thing you need to bear in mind too is it's going to have an impact on the morale of the people who are left behind. They often feel a sense of loss, so you need to work on staff morale as well. And I think being an authentic leader which I think is evidenced in the way in which that statement was made back in November last year. I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And look, communicate these principles to your staff.
Yeah.
So if you're a Christian leading a business and you have the same understanding that I do, you make it clear to everybody that I really do believe that God is the one who provides for every single one of us.
Mm-hmm.
And that God has given this business a mission. This business is on assignment, an assignment which has been given to it by God. And that's what we have to be true to.
Yeah.
But as I said, there are better and worse ways of actually dealing with that separation from the workplace.
Yeah. And I want to kind of finish this off with a statement that was made by a spokesperson for Stripe about these most recent firings. And the statement just said, these changes are never easy, and we had to say goodbye to about 40 very talented employees. And I said, like, in areas like recruiting, but like, I just thought it was beautiful that they're still being encouraging and being supportive and still showing love and to those people. It's not like going, oh well, stuff them, they're gone. Like they were dead weight. We get rid of them. No, they actually said that like we have to say goodbye, right? Which is expressing that it's sad, but expressing that they're very talented. Like it's a pity that we have to get rid of these talented people. Whereas a lot of people, when they go through their firing process, they kind of start getting a little nasty and like, oh, they're dead weight and we don't need them. Then we start looking for bad things they did and everything like that. Like, what if we could find a way to love people on the way out? Like that's really what will set us apart as Christian leaders. If someone's leaving your team, no matter what's happened, how can you love them on the way out? How can you still show them love and appreciation as they're exiting? I think that this is kind of like to sum up really the theory behind this story with Stripe is sometimes we have to fire people, but let's take our responsibility and make sure we love people on the way out as well. And that's how we can set ourselves apart as good leaders. So, talking about firing, let's go and talk about hiring. A great little opportunity. There was too many ads running on this page, so it reloaded. Safari told me this web page had to reload because there was too much going on. Now I've got to stop that before it goes on. Whatever. Okay. Yep. So, sorry. Get rid of that because that is not actually what we're talking about. The Twitter or new X on top of the building. But what we're talking about is hiring people. Because we spoke about firing. How do we hire? And there was this report about US firms, including Netflix, Amazon, etc., are offering jobs, AI jobs that pay up to $900,000. Now, if you go through, so there was, where was it? Let me get out of here. So this page has way too many ads on it. So yeah, it's really interesting that there's all this. The Hollywood actors are striking, writers are striking because of AI, and now all these companies are now going, "Yep, we're gonna go and invest in AI." So Netflix offers a job that for AI or machine learning between 300 and 900,000. Amazon offering 340,000. That's not including bonuses. Who else was there? There was someone else that was offering at Walmart $288,000. Google, a lawyer offering 350. Actually, that's not too much for a lawyer at Google, I wouldn't assume, but that's not including bonuses. But it's interesting that this AI, and actually, I think it's quite interesting that one of the ad descriptions, the job listings, said, no college degree required. We just want someone to do AI. It's this merging market that is just absolutely incredibly just going gangbusters, and everyone's realizing the importance of it. So one thing that I do say to my clients when we're hiring, and we have actually gone through, a number of my clients have gone through a really tough time for hiring for the last couple of years. With COVID around, it became really hard to hire really good quality employees. Anyone, because obviously the government was handing out easy money. No one wanted to work. Everyone wanted to. And so it's really interesting that that hiring the right people is hard in a competitive market. And one thing I just said to my clients is sometimes you just have to offer more than the rest. That you just have to offer more money, because sometimes, yes, it costs you a little bit more, but how much are you losing because you don't have that person in that position? How much is it costing your business? You know, the opportunity cost for not having someone in that role. And maybe we need to just have the reality that sometimes we need to pay more, and then that means we need to rejig our prices and stuff like that, maybe to be able to afford that. You know, it's part of the bigger picture. But Dr. Rod, what's your take on splashing out to try to get good talent?
Good idea. Simple. It's simply a good idea. And, you know, I don't have a problem with people earning a high income.
Mm-hmm.
If they're creating value within their organization, good on them, really. I mean, theologically, I'm more concerned about what they might do with their $900,000 a year, frankly. But this is, and honestly, I don't think this is inconsistent with the Bible either. That I don't see any evidence in the Bible that we should all be paid the same amount or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
The parable of the talents makes it fairly clear God's gifted everybody differently.
Mm-hmm.
We're not to be valued based on the value we represent to a company or anything like that.
No.
Of course, our personal value derives from the fact that we're created by and loved by God, and that's that. End of the story. So no, and again, obviously, I'm trained in economics. I understand how markets work. I understand there is a demand side and there is a supply side, and if supply is short in this case, if workers with appropriate skills in the AI area are short, then their wage is going to go up. And good on them if there are people who can get those jobs. All I say is congratulations, good on you, but think carefully about what you do with the income that you earn. That's all I would say. And I actually wrote something up in my own prayer and Bible study this morning, which I ended up putting on our church Facebook page, where say, listen, you know, if you're earning a big income, by way of say profit, if you're in business, or certainly salary, just remember in Proverbs 25, it says something there around about verse 16, I think it is. It says something about there, if you find honey, don't eat too much because too much will make you sick. Okie doke. And same with income. If you have too much income and do stupid things with it, it'll end up making you sick.
Yeah.
In more than one way, actually. So I think you need to apply a lot of wisdom in terms of what you do with your income. Be generous to yourself, your spouse, and your family. That's what Wesley said in his absolutely fabulous sermon on the uses of money. But after that, you have a look around and see what good you can do.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I think that I see a lot of videos on YouTube about, you know, these athletes going broke. You know, they're on $50 million a year contracts or whatever it might be, and they're
the
going
honey's
broke,
made them sick, hasn't it?
Exactly.
They've had too much of the honey, you know.
Yeah. And so, my question to you then, as you know, I'm trying to figure this out because the supply and demand right now, AI people are in need. There's not many of them, and these companies desperately need them because AI is it's just a part of what we're doing now, and all of these organizations need to get deeper in their AI to provide better services and better experiences. We pay someone $900,000 a year, but let's say in general terms, most people's salaries go up over time. But in 5 years' time, there'll be a lot more people that are AI, experts or technicians or whatever they want to call it, and therefore there'll be less demand.
Well, there might not be less demand, but there'll be greater supply.
Greater supply.
So
yes.
What I would expect is that in 5 years' time, it'll be pretty hard to get a $900,000 job as an AI creator.
Yeah. But what happens to the people that are earning that $900 now? Do you think that they will continue to? I don't know, because they're
not in the United
States.
No. Not if they're employed in the United States, because they don't have the same sorts of rigidities that you do in Europe and Australasia. So no. And the other thing too, of course, is that 900,000 or 300,000, whatever it is you start on, that's a base salary.
Yeah.
There are also bonuses. So I would expect that early on there'll be fairly big bonuses, but later on they'd virtually dry up. The other thing too, of course, is that if you become too expensive on $900,000 a year, guess what will happen?
Yeah.
You lose your job.
Mm-hmm.
And in any case, people with these kinds of skills, see, these kinds of skills are not company specific, they're not firm specific. And so those employees are what we call footloose. They're just as likely to accept a $100,000 higher offer at another organisation and just, make the transfer across. So this is how markets work. And on the whole, they work pretty well, actually, because they deliver things that contribute positively to human flourishing. I mean, I think, generally speaking, markets work very well. There are some areas in which markets don't work so well, but often when we observe markets working poorly, it's because some stupid government has intervened for political purposes.
Yeah.
There you go. That's my bias out on the table.
I think it's interesting. As an economist, I would assume you would lean more towards supporting what governments do because you are an economist, but it's actually quite quite the opposite sometimes when you come out with it.
Oh no. Markets do pretty well most of the time.
Yeah.
But they're not going to deliver a good national defence force, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly for the lower income countries, there's some argument for government getting involved in education and health as well. But once you get into a much higher income, I don't think there's a very strong case for government to be involved in much else other than defining and protecting private property rights and national defence. Most other things governments interfere in, they actually muck it up.
So hiring people, let's say focus on this. What would be some other strategies of attracting talent other than paying $900K plus bonuses?
Well, see, sometimes the income is a direct response to the balance between demand and supply, but sometimes it might have something to do with the toxicity of the workplace. So you might find it difficult to fill positions, not because there's a general lack of supply in that market, but because you're not a very good place to work for.
Yeah.
So I think there are lots of things you can do. You need to make a workplace somewhere where people are actually happy to be.
Going back to that culture thing that we were speaking about before.
Partly, absolutely. It's cultural as well. But I don't think the focus, from our perspective as observers, I don't think our focus should be on how much money people are earning. It's more, is it good work? Are they producing a good as opposed to a bad that people are able to consume?
Yeah, I think that like what you were saying about having a good work environment and things like that. I think that is actually you spoke about it from the negative, like we have to pay so much because it has a negative culture. I think on the alternative, there's one thing that I do work with a number of my clients on is we build such a positive culture that stands out in their industry that they've got people knocking down their doors because they're like, hey, we want to come and work for you because you've got a better culture. We hear people are happy working with you. We see what you're doing and we see what you're doing in the industry. And because they're a positive influence, when you do that, then you have a better standing and a better, I suppose, more attraction that people will actually come and want to work for you, and it's not about the money then. Because
Well, look, surveys show that people would happily trade off a pay rise against a pat on the back, so to speak. I'm simplifying there, but the salary's only part of the overall work package.
Yeah.
And the culture of the workplace is an important factor as well. And look, honestly, managers or owners can save themselves a lot of money actually by treating people well.
And one of the higher ranking reasons why people stay or leave is growth. The fact that they feel like they are actually growing as a person, they're being invested in, they're growing, they're learning new things, they're able to not only growth in promotion, but just growth in your own skills. If we're constantly providing our people opportunities to continue to grow and stretch themselves and things like that, they will be more fulfilled in their roles rather than just trying to be chasing the paycheck. Because
absolutely. Look,
when people are unfulfilled, all they're looking at is those dollars and going, is this worth it? And in most cases, no, it's not.
Well, look, one of the main reasons why people leave their place of employment is they don't get on with their manager. So they haven't had a good experience with their manager. I think, the key really is to recognise that we're dealing with people. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, when we've got a human resources department, we can focus on the resources rather than the human. And I think we need to be mindful of that. We're actually dealing with people. People have feelings. People's feelings matter. And people will often make decisions based on how they feel about things.
Yeah, that's really good. That's really good. Well, actually, that's a perfect transition into our next story. Talking about feelings. Let's talk about feelings versus resources. There was a story of a woman in Australia working for an insurance company who was working from home. She'd been working from home for a long time, but she was fired due to low keystroke activity. But she says she was targeted due to her mental health issues. I thought it was a really interesting story to end off with because I think that there's a little bit of kind of everything that we've been speaking about today around hiring and firing and all those sorts of things. But still there's actually understanding that there is a human element to what we do. And I kind of want to focus on that with you for a moment, Dr. Rod. But let me tell you a little bit about this story. So what happened is this woman, she'd been working for 18 years. She'd been working for the country, working for the company, not working for the country, working for the company for 18 years, doing work from home compliance stuff, right? And she worked from home for Insurance Australia Group. And the company in November noticed that her work performance was really dropping. She'd been given some formal warnings. Then she continued to miss deadlines and meetings and was absent and unreachable and everything like that. So the company introduced a keystroke technology that would monitor her activity, and over the course of 49 working days, and there was all these like over all this time. There was a bunch of so many hours where there was actually 0 keystrokes, and like there was 60 hours in one month. There was 0. So 0 keystrokes were recorded for 17 hours, 117 hours in October. That's 0. Like, didn't touch the keyboard once for 117 hours during work hours in 1 month. 143 in November, and then 60 in December. And I'm assuming that was a low number because there was 2 weeks holiday in that, so there was only half the time. That's what I'm assuming. And then there was days late that she didn't turn up on, and stuff like days late and finishing early and all that sort of stuff, right? So she ended up and had an average of 54 keystrokes per hour. That's when she was actually working, 54 keystrokes per hour. She then claims that she was unfairly
dismissed.
That's right.
Unfairly dismissed. Yeah.
I don't know where that unfairly dismissed. And she says that she was targeted for her mental health. Now, there's a lot in this that I want to discuss with you, Dr. Rod. And I think it's, first of all, this whole work from home, remote, managing performance. I suppose there's two sides of the boat. One is, should we be recording keystrokes? Is that a good tool? Or should we be measuring outcomes? Because that was my initial thought when I read the headline. I'm like, who cares what her keystrokes are? As long as she's hitting the outcomes, isn't that what's important?
Look, the keystrokes was the headline. That wasn't the reason why she was fired. She was fired because she wasn't meeting key performance indicators. Mm-hmm. She was missing deadlines, for example.
Yeah.
And this may have been something reasonably recent because she'd been working from home for some 17 years.
Yeah.
So that was obviously part of her employment relationship. The big issue for me, though, is, was she aware that her keystrokes were being monitored? Because there's a...
Well, I don't think she would have been, because I think she would have made a little bit more effort to make some keystrokes.
But the funny thing is that during COVID, when so many people were working from home, I remember seeing stuff on social media, make sure you do a few keystrokes every hour because your boss will be watching you. Mm-hmm. And I've in my mind's eye all these people who are watching Netflix on the couch with a keyboard, and every now and then they just randomly hit a few keys. So I'm thinking to myself, why didn't she see that stuff on social media?
Yeah. One of the reporters on one of the videos that was on this was saying like that Homer episode where he had that little bird that just dips and presses the key. Yep. So if Homer understood it, why?
I look, it's a little bit like having spy cameras at your office desk. I do think that you need to make your employees aware that we may be monitoring your keystrokes if you're working from home, all right? So I think it's right and proper that's done. The other thing is this. We've got no way whatsoever of making an assessment about whether she had mental illness or not. Mm-hmm. But I think we also have to understand that if you're ill for any reason, and it's a long-term illness which impairs your performance, under Australian law, employers actually have the right to terminate your employment. Yep. There's a right and wrong way to do it. And it's interesting in that the judgment that was made here was based on her consistently not meeting her performance requirements.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the judgment did note that they weren't making any comment about, I think the judgment noted that let me get this right because this is really, really important. In the judgment, her own claims of mental illness were not being refuted, all right? Yep. So they didn't downplay any distress that she might have been in because of her mental illness. Mm-hmm. But they did uphold the right of the employer to sack this particular member of staff because they weren't meeting their performance requirements.
Yeah.
And a lot of people here in Australia think that they've got legal protection even if they have a long-term illness. But if you have a long-term illness that prevents you from performing the work which is required in your position description, then the employer does have the right to terminate your employment.
Yeah, I want to kind of leave that to the side because I do want to get back to that because I think I do want to discuss that as a slightly separate thing. I want to stay on this keystroke thing and monitoring performance because I think that there is. You're right. We should be our team members, the people who we are leading, should know what they're being measured on and by, right?
Absolutely.
You can't hit a target that you can't see, right? Like so if I'm going to judge you by keystrokes, then I need to let you know I'm going to be monitoring you by keystrokes. I think that's important. I think that's a lot of leaders actually fall down there, that they have expectations in their mind that they actually don't verbalize, that they're not actually really communicating that to their team. And how you hear it all the time. The team like the ambitious goals. We've got no idea. He's unhappy that the boss is unhappy that we didn't hit something that we didn't even know that we're aiming towards. So I think that is one important part. But there's also, for me, going back to this whole thing of, and after reading into it, I think I believe they did a good job of the process in which they went through this, that it is about the performance outcome. And sometimes we micromanage people. Are you doing enough keystrokes? Well, the keystrokes isn't what's important. Are they achieving their goals? Have you set, as a leader, have you set appropriate outcomes, KPIs, whatever they be, and are they meeting them? Who cares how they're meeting them? Now, you need to manage your efficiencies. If you get to a point where your team are hitting all their goals, but they're only working 20% of the day, well, possibly we could maybe try to up the target some more, or maybe we could add some more projects, or whatever it may be. So, but I think that's a different thing. Performance and efficiencies are two different conversations as a leader. So, how would you communicate to a leader, Dr. Rod, that they need to stop micromanaging and stop worrying about keystrokes and just worry about output?
Well, look, I understand what you're saying, that it's outputs, not inputs, that really matter. In this particular case, the issue was actually output.
100%. But
Right.
I want to
The
leave that
keystrokes
aside for a moment.
It was just a kind of technological way of proving a point, so to speak. All right. Yes, it's the outputs that really matter. And I remember having a university lecturer say this once. And I think he practiced it as well. Once your work's done, you can go home. You might as well go home. I actually think that the community aspect of work might dictate something a little bit different. But look, it is important that if you're a boss, a leader, that you make your expectations perfectly clear.
Yeah.
And let me give you an example. I had an interaction with a CEO at a board meeting where what I thought was a KPI wasn't in his mind a KPI, because we missed the KPI, and in response he said, "Oh, well, that was aspirational." And I did a double take. No, KPIs are not aspirational. And I thought about it. Well, hang on a minute. There's been a little tiny bit of mix-up here in the communication, because I had a particular idea in my mind that a KPI was something, it was a target. You better meet that target or else there'll be consequences.
Yep.
For him, it was something we aspire to. Now, something we aspire to is not necessarily something we feel we can be held to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's a bit
But
different.
a
It's
KPI
like
is. So that's kind of
it's
like the difference between
yeah,
a goal, or a vision almost,
absolutely.
and a KPI.
Absolutely. Look, I know I would say if I had to be self-critical, I've had more dreams than strategies in my own life. I've
Yes.
dreamt about things, and I've still got some dreams. But you see, unless I build a strategy around those dreams, they're just going to be dreams.
Yes.
And to some extent, and when we say, well, it's aspirational, it's just saying, well, I was dreaming about it. That's my dream. But when you turn it into a KPI, you're actually putting a number and a timeline on it, which is very, very different. So I think, we better understand our language here.
That's really good.
Just make sure that there's no miscommunication. Now, I think one of the ways to do that as a leader is, one, if repeat what we're saying, but then two, check for understanding. And there's no better way than saying, so what's your understanding of this? What is it that I'm asking you to do?
Yeah.
I didn't do that in that particular, because I made this. Everybody knows what a KPI is. Well, everybody doesn't know what a KPI is.
Yeah. You would assume that everyone knows what a KPI is.
Well,
Yes.
either because they haven't read the same textbooks I've read, or because I've come in, new director, and I don't know enough about the culture to understand that in this culture, a KPI is aspirational, or we've allowed people to treat it as aspirational.
Yeah.
So it's a communication issue. We've got to get the communication right. We have to make our expectations perfectly clear, and we also have to make clear the personal responsibility, but the outcomes associated with either meeting or not meeting the KPI, which is not necessarily, well, if you don't meet all your KPIs, we're going to sack you. Because I think in setting KPIs, we've also, as an organisation, we've got to take some responsibility too, which might say, well, we've got to provide you with the marketing budget in order to meet that KPI, or we've got to make sure that you have appropriate staff, both in number, qualifications and experience. Because if I give a set of KPIs to my CEO, but then if I'm not prepared to approve budget for the marketing function, for the product development function, and so on, then I'm going to set him up as a failure. I'm going to set the executive up for failure, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, we had on that tone, I was working with a leader that we had set a target to achieve for us to progress to something else. And at the end of the year, we didn't reach that target. But throughout the year, I kept offering suggestions, recommendations, strategies, offering, let's do this program, let's do this, let's do that. And every one of those was shut down. And then we did at the end of the year, is like, well, we didn't hit the target. It's like, well, actually, you're responsible for shutting that down. I think you're absolutely right there that we as leaders, yes, we need to set KPIs for our team, but we also need to provide the resources for them to be able to achieve it, whether it be the skills, whether it be the budget, whether it be whatever resources they need. We need to be able to help them hit their KPIs. But I don't know. I kind of see a KPI as like, this is what you're hired and fired against, right? Like it's kind of like,
absolutely. That's ultimately that's the conversation.
Yeah.
But you've got to have a detailed analysis as to why a KPI wasn't met, or why it was met for that matter. We tend to ignore it when it's met. We just heave a sigh of relief and trundle on to the next thing.
Yeah.
But look, if I can, I'll say something about an annual performance review or regular performance review. When we're doing that, we normally look back and ask ourselves the question, well, how did you go with the KPIs? And let's have a look at the reasons why you did or didn't meet them. The other thing we do is look forward to the next period and set KPIs then. Now, that's when we need to have a conversation around the issue of what do we need to do in order to facilitate you meeting those KPIs.
Yeah.
So what do we need to provide in the budget? What do we need to provide by way of staff? What are some of the risks associated with that KPI?
Yeah.
So is this KPI highly sensitive to something like the CPI, which we've got no way of knowing what that's going to be 6 months down the track? So is it highly sensitive to us being able to fill a couple of key positions that we haven't been able to fill for the last 2 years? So we've got to say, in giving you a KPI, we're saying, well, yes, we're holding you accountable for the KPI. However, we're also accountable for a few things here as well. And you've got to have an agreement on what you're accountable for as, say, the CEO or a director or the owner of a business, and what your manager is accountable for.
Yeah.
You can't set your people up for failure.
No. It's our responsibility to make sure they succeed. Make sure they succeed.
That's absolutely like we want to be marching together towards success.
Because if you're setting unrealistic,
you keep going. Oh, shut up.
If you're setting unrealistic goals, and your team continually, repeatedly, and routinely miss the KPI, they're going to be unmotivated. And every time you then, actually going back to your story, then every time you set a KPI, it becomes, oh yeah, that's a nice dream, but no one's actually going to be driving towards it because it's like, well, we never hit them anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Well, I can remember once in a CEO role, I said to the director, to the chair of the board, what are my KPIs? And he's response, oh, well, you go and set KPIs for all your staff and then we'll talk about yours. And I'm thinking, no. You got it exactly around the wrong way. If I don't know. Now, for me, that left me in a position where I had to discover my KPIs. That was pretty tough, let me tell you.
Yeah.
And so, sure, I set some KPIs for my staff. But at the end of the day, I discovered they were the wrong ones, because the KPIs that I sort of discovered along the way were quite different to what I thought they were. Yeah. And look, if you're the chair of a board, for goodness sake, you make sure you have a chat with your CEO and get these KPIs written down, because you lose your CEO otherwise. Now, also, through resignation or stress.
And that's in any role, though. Like you're saying CEO, but like any leadership role. But I want to speak to, there's a lot of business owners or leaders that would be maybe hiring their first like leader to kind of take over their role, and maybe they don't have everything set up. Now, it's very important that when you're recruiting that you have all of your things set up, where you spend time setting up 13-week induction programs, your position descriptions, org charts, like your recruiting programs. Like we do all of that, right? Like it's intense to be able to do that properly. And most people don't do it properly. They don't have the time to do it, so they just hire off a whim or whatever. And there is place for that. Please understand, like, it's not like you need, Dr. Rod said, like, he got told to just go and discover his KPIs. There is actually a place for that. Sometimes we encourage people to hire someone, and if they have enough skill or experience, do give them some freedom, especially if it's in a new role, and just go, hey, we're figuring this out together. Let's look, you go and discover and figure out, but we as a leader need to give them the boundaries for that. We as a leader need to help structure that. We as a leader need to help position that at times, rather than just allowing them like, oh, well, you figure it out yourself. No, it's not. There's a difference between delegation and abdication, right? So you delegate something to them and go, look, I haven't got this set for, I trust you. I trust your experience. You go and discover this, but let's work this out to come back and report to me. We'll figure this out. Then you give them feedback on that, rather than it just being purely abdication of like, oh yeah, you just create your own. All right. But Dr. Rod, there was one other thing. I want to get back to this mental health thing, because I think that this is a big part of this story. Although it's a big part of what I wanted to talk about this story. I don't think it's a big part of this story, because I think at the end of the day, this insurance company, I think they did the right thing. Her performance wasn't good over time. I'm sure they did some things like they warned her. It said that they gave her some written warnings, and there was lots of things that they did over time. Then they did the Keystrokes. So it seems like they've done their due diligence, right? They've gone through their process. They, as an insurance company, probably have a very substantial HR department that made sure that they were doing this properly. So they've done this well. But let's just take it theoretically. And we as a leader have someone in our organization that is suffering from a mental health issue, a family issue, like a personal issue, a health issue, something, a physical health issue, something that's going on with them that is affecting their performance. How do we manage that as a leader and as a Christian to kind of, because we've got to love people, but, how do we manage that as a leader?
Well, look, yeah, you do have to love people, and you do have to remember that people are people and people have feelings, and that mental illness is real. All right. Mm-hmm. I think I've shared before that, there was a time in my life where I needed the professional help of a psychiatrist because I was undergoing a long period of very, very serious depression. I needed help. I also had enormous support in my workplace.
Yeah.
I'll never, ever forget the degree of empathy that I had and the way in which my workplace bent over backwards to help me become well again. It was, I'm filled with gratitude for that. Yes, we have to do that. But look, this, and again, I say this so often, it sounds really harsh, but you can't undermine the purpose of the business or the organization, because that's God-given. If you're a Christian, I hope you're on the assignment that God has given you, that the mission that you have for your business is reflective of what God wants your business to exist for. So you can't undermine that. However, don't forget that there's also the principle of neighbor love. Yep. So expressing neighbor love doesn't mean allowing your business to go under and therefore having no work for anybody. But I think, number one, you should recognize that mental illness is an illness, the same as any other illness, and that to the extent that you're able to, you should be able to provide your people with some relief. Now, look, in Australia, we have legislative obligations for employers to extend sick leave to staff, and mental illness is covered by sick leave. I think where you're able to, without undermining the purpose of the organisation, extend people some further consideration. Allow them to go on leave for half pay or to have a little bit of extra paid sick leave, providing that you're able to do that. If you're a larger organisation, you may well have access to consultancies who can help you with mental health management in the workplace. In fact, there's a whole, a subset of human resource helpers which are focused on keeping people mentally healthy in the workplace. Now, that's an investment in prevention rather than an investment in, as it were, the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. It's like investing in the fence at the top of the cliff rather than the ambulance at the bottom. Yeah. And this is very difficult if it's a family-run business without very much revenue. But if it's a larger business with substantial revenue, then look at investing in the overall mental health of the full workforce. Look, there are lots and lots of businesses now, for example, that will pay gym memberships or, provide other incentives for people to get involved in a gym, which is going to help physical and mental health. But there are also now lots of highly reputable professional companies that will provide mental health. There is a name, the name of this area escapes me. Someone watching will know it. I had a friend who sadly is now deceased who specialised in this area. The program he offered was just unbelievable. It was really good.
Aaron, Erin, who has been on this podcast before and is one of our directors, she's a psychologist, and that's what she specializes in. Like,
well, she'll tell me what the word is that I've forgotten, but
mental
honestly,
health stuff.
It's brilliant. It is
Yeah.
absolutely brilliant. It will build resilience in your people in the area of sort of mental health resilience.
Yeah.
In the long run, almost certainly it will save you money, particularly in a regime like we have in Australia. It may be a little bit different in the United States, but certainly here in Australia, I think, and in much of Europe as well, we have quite different regulations concerning hiring and firing people. But it's a really good investment. And I think it's an expression of neighbour love to the extent that you're able to provide your employees with opportunities to grow and to stay healthy.
Yeah. Now, on that point, first of all, yes, offering additional training, expanding their skills, in giving them opportunities to try new things, all that sort of stuff. Like, definitely invest in your people to make sure they're valued. I will say one thing though, Dr. Rod, about the getting the health, and I really, really, truly believe in mental health. And one of our directors is a psychologist, and she's been my kind of unofficial psychologist for many, many, many years because we're friends, and she's my director. She can't be a psychologist, but she's a friend with psychology experience. I see a psychologist as well. I believe in getting professional help. You have to. And sometimes it's beyond, don't just go to a mindset coach or whatever. Like, sometimes it needs a professional, right? But let me just throw this out as a little bit of a warning. Make sure you seek legal advice before you offer any sort of mental health support. There are some risks that come from you offering that, because it can be perceived that because you're offering it, you're then admitting fault that you're providing a stressful work environment or whatever, right? So be very careful. Like, I completely agree with everything that you're saying, Dr. Rodden. I believe that we should be supporting them, but make sure you do it properly. Make sure you seek legal advice. Go to a HR company and figure out how can you actually properly provide that. Don't just randomly go, right, we're sending everyone to a psychologist.
Exactly. Well, what you don't do is you don't diagnose anyone as having mental health and say, you should do this program. Never do that.
Yeah.
I'm talking about making a program generally available to all staff, and you do that perhaps we're making an announcement or making everybody aware that this is part of the conditions of employment here, that you can avail yourself of this at any time.
Yeah.
But as an employer, as a manager, as a director, don't you ever diagnose anybody's illness.
No, and also
no matter what it is, mental or otherwise.
Yeah, and I think one big key we can learn as leaders also is we shouldn't overstep our boundaries, right? Like, we as a leader, we're not their savior. Like you were saying before, Dr. Odd, that we're not their provider. We're not their savior. We're also not their psychologist. We're not their counselor. We are their leader. Yes, we can be empathetic to them. We can be a shoulder to cry on from time to time or whatever. But make sure you have clear boundaries, because you don't want those lines blurred. Because one, you don't want to be caught out of depth, and you don't want to get caught up in giving advice on something that doesn't go right and that's outside of your area of expertise or whatever. I know that a lot of leaders, especially if you're watching this, you care for people, you love people, and you're like, I just want to help them. And so maybe you are that person that everyone's coming to and confiding. Be very careful. Be very careful. Sometimes as a leader, a lot of times as a leader, it's not our responsibility to be the answer, but point direction, direct people to the answer. So just be very, very careful of that. Well, let's jump over to our leadership lessons from Luke, and let's speak about We're talking about hiring and firing, and I thought it was really interesting that I've actually been wanting to talk about this story because, I mean, the heading of this in chapter 16, verse 1 of Luke is the parable of the shrewd manager. And I kind of always had this up my sleeve because I'm like, this is leadership 101, really, isn't it? Like that, with a heading like that, like, all right, like, okay, we need to be a shrewd manager. Let me actually read. There's a lot in this, so let me just read it, and then I want to discuss it with Dr. Rod. So Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. Back to what you were saying, Dr. Rod, before, like, you can earn all that money, but don't waste it. So he called him in and asked him, what is it I hear that you hear about you? Give an account for your management because you cannot be manager any longer. So he's firing him, right? He's calling him in, giving him a performance review, and he's firing them. The manager said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do. I know what I'll do when I lose my job here, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. Kind of a bit of a theme, like I know that Dr. Rod said earlier, when you're firing people, make sure you offer them an opportunity to come in and do their resumes or whatever. There's actually a bit of a theory in, when you go to fire someone, at the moment you decide to fire them, they need to be off the premises because they can run amok. You don't know what they're stealing from, what data they're going to be stealing or what toxicity they're going to be spreading. So be careful. So he called each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first one, how much do you owe my master? 800 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 400. Then he asked the second, and how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. And he told him, take your bill and make it 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than they are of people of the light. Now, before I go on, I think this is where the question that I have is for you, Dr. Rod. The manager's kind of stealing from him, really. Like, that's the way that I kind of see it. And then the master commended him. I don't understand that part.
Well, guess what? You're not the only one. I tell you, this parable has probably excited more thought than any other.
Really?
Because we've got a manager here who's clearly doing the wrong thing, and yet the master commends him. Now, I reckon the audience that Jesus was speaking to, they would have woken up at that point. They might have had a sense of indignation, particularly the Pharisees among them, many of whom were very, very attached to money, many of whom were fairly wealthy. They weren't all. A lot of the Pharisees weren't, because just being a Pharisee didn't actually put you in the ranks of the elite. And the Pharisees also did care for the poor. So I'm guessing that among this group of Pharisees, there were some who were very much hooked on money, mammon, as Jesus calls it a little later on. But I don't think the point of the parable is that the manager did something wrong. I think the point of the parable is that the manager did something shrewd or cunning. And what it was that he was doing was currying favour, which he could draw on when his employment ceased. And he was obviously fairly certain that that was going to happen. I've often thought, well, okay, if the master, the owner, was Jesus, why would he commend his steward or his manager for doing what he did. Well, actually, the reason being, Jesus' model is very different to the model of the world. And our God, who owns everything and has actually only given us stewardship rights over everything, does expect that we use what he has given us to steward in order to advance the kingdom, in order to make friends that we take with us into eternity.
Yeah.
Now, I haven't actually seen too many commentaries along those lines, but that was a thought that occurred to me as I was preparing for our podcast, that the master is Jesus. We are his stewards. He's the one who's given us everything, and he does expect us to steward it in a very different way to what those who are in the world would do, because our natural inclination, drawing on the world's philosophies, would be, oh, no, that manager was doing something wrong. But in the kingdom, no, it isn't. In the kingdom, you use the resources that God has given you to steward to advance the kingdom. And that does mean winning friends for Jesus, winning friends who you will spend eternity with. That's just an interesting wrinkle. But I think the main point is this, that Jesus wasn't making any commentary really on the ethical position of the manager. His commentary was on the way in which the manager was using the resources he had to steward in such a way as to create friends for the future.
So, moral of the story, be deceitful, steal from your boss, and
make friends.
And win favor. No, I think that like I said, there is a lot of well, I think actually looking at the firing and hiring concept is the manager, if he had have acted like that from the beginning, maybe he wouldn't have been fired, because...
Well, actually, the parable doesn't conclude with his being fired anyway. As far as we know, he wasn't fired because his shrewdness was something that, for some reason or other, was attractive to the master.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it?
So, I mean, there's a few things in there. When you go to fire someone, make sure you fire them and get them off the property, because they will go around and steal your accounts and stuff like that. You need to be careful of that. But yeah, I think that there's a lot to take on that. But look, hiring and firing, it is very, very important for us as leaders that we get good at hiring and firing, because we need the right team with us. Now, firing people, we have to go through the right processes. We have to, you make sure we do it right, to make sure it's, one, fair, but also, we can't just fire people willy-nilly. We have to try to... Now I say that willy-nilly, I wonder where that jargon actually came from. But anyway, we can't just fire people off a whim, right? We have to performance manage. We have to look at ourselves. Was it our culture? Was it something that we did wrong that we need to fix first? Get our values aligned, our values clear, so that people can align themselves with our values, and maybe the team members will vote themselves off the island instead of us having to fire them. When we're trying to recruit people, trying to recruit the right talent, sometimes we just got to pay the big dollars to attract them. Other times, if we got that right culture, we're going to be attracting people anyway to our organization. And unfortunately, you need to make sure that you're attracting the right talent to your team, because that's how you can best perform your outcome, your purpose as an organization, as a leader, with whatever you're leading, whether it be a ministry, whether it be a business, whether it be a corporation. You have a purpose, and that purpose is, as Dr. Rod said, add value to your customers, add value to your community. And so make sure that you have the best team to be delivering that value. So recruit the right people, but also make sure you're getting the people out of there that aren't performing properly in the right way with neighborly love, as Dr. Rod shared. Now, if you've enjoyed this, give it a thumbs up. It helps the algorithm, giving us a thumbs up, and put a comment below, say hi, whatever. Do give us a comment. And hey, if you've liked this stuff, please consider subscribing to the channel. It would be an honor to see you part of our community. But Dr. Rod, once again, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today.
It's always good to be with you, Craig. I really do enjoy it. And, praise God, we trust that some people will gain some value from this.
Yeah, awesome. And thank you, Yash, in the background for pressing buttons. And thank you for watching. And we will see you next week. Bless you and have a great week.